everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Your Relationship. Nope, that's not my podcast name. See, this is hilarious. I'm actually going to leave that in because we're talking today about starting again, not starting over. And one of the many times that I have started again, not started over, is switching over this podcast. It used to be called the Your Relationship With podcast. Now it is called the Powerful Women Rising podcast. But obviously, I've done that introduction so many times that my muscle memory is like, this is what we say next. So I'm leaving it in just because I think it's funny and fitting for today's topic. Anywho, let's try that again. I'm Melissa Snow, and you're listening to the Powerful Women Rising podcast. If you've never tuned in before, you can expect this podcast to be a little bit different than other podcasts you might have listened to. I don't always rehearse. I don't always know what's going to come out of my mouth, but it usually ends up okay. And a lot of times I just leave my mistakes in for authenticity purposes and so that you can see that not every other entrepreneur is as perfect as they look or sound on podcasts, on social media, anywhere else. Let me tell you a little bit about my business. Powerful Women Rising is my company. I run the Powerful Women Rising community, which is an online community for female entrepreneurs. It's a combination of networking, masterminding, business strategy, mindset coaching, all kinds of things. I actually just added in a component of one-on-one coaching, which I'm super excited about. I've already done several sessions with women in the group, and it's been game-changing. It's been really, really fun and great for them, great for me. So if you want to learn more about it, definitely check out the link in the show notes. And also, we have our next virtual speed networking event coming up on February 29th, if you're listening to this in real time. That is from 12 to 1 p.m. Mountain Time. I've done this very many other times. This is the most people we've ever had registered. We already have 251 women registered last time I checked, and it's still like 2 weeks away. So if you want to meet some really awesome women, make some great connections, find some new opportunities for your business, and see what it's like to network like a human and not like a salesy weirdo, definitely click the link in the show notes and join us for that. It's going to be super fun. Okay, let's get to the point now. Today we are talking about starting again and not starting over. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this topic, and I'm talking about it myself instead of bringing an expert on, is I'm going to be reshuffling some things with the podcast here. I hired an amazing podcast coach. If you follow me on social media, you've seen all the little clips and things that she posts. Shout out to Kaylee. She's amazing. And one of the things that she suggested was doing more solo episodes and less interview episodes. I love, 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 love the interviews. And I know that they're super valuable, and I've brought on some really amazing women, but I'm also really excited at the possibility and the idea of coming on here and sharing some of my own wisdom because I have a lot of it. I've been in business for a long time. I've had a lot of experiences, both in life and in business, that you can learn from. And I talk really fast, which probably makes you happy if you're like me and you listen to podcasts on like 0.5 speed. Anyway, I was thinking like, oh my gosh, I started this podcast almost a year ago exactly. It was called the Your Relationship With podcast. I've changed the name. Now I'm kind of changing like how the podcast works. It's not going to be all interviews. And every time I make a change like this, it feels like, we're just starting all over. Like I thought we were on the right track and now we're starting all over. And this has happened several other times in my business, and I think it's actually very normal. But I wanted to talk about the idea of starting again versus starting over because I was thinking about how much I have learned just in the last year of doing this podcast. This is not actually my first podcast, but how much I've learned in the last year to where starting this podcast again with a different name and kind of a different model feels like starting over, but it's actually not. There's this quote that I keep thinking of that says, "No woman steps in the same river twice, for she is not the same woman, and it is never the same river." And I keep thinking about that in terms of what we're talking about today, because So many times in business, when you have to pivot, it feels like starting over, but you are actually going to that pivot with so much more wisdom and experience and things that you didn't have the first time. So it really is starting again and not starting over. The illusion of starting over and the reality of starting again are very different things. And it creates a very different feeling in your mind and in your body when you think, oh my gosh, I'm starting all over, which is what it really feels like sometimes, versus I'm starting again. And now I have all of this experience that I didn't have before. So starting over really is like starting at square one. And when you think of it like that, of course, it feels daunting and it carries a very negative connotation because we can all remember, well, I think we can all remember what it was like starting out our business brand new. If you are anything like me, I was just like, I'm a certified coach. This is going to be great. It didn't even really occur to me that I didn't know anything about marketing or sales or really how to run a business. I just knew how to coach. I knew I was a good coach. I knew I wanted to be a coach and I knew I could help people. And so I was like, here I am. Who's ready for help? And then no one came. And I was like, what the hell? What's happening? So thinking about who you were on day one of your business versus who you are now, even if you have a completely different business than you did then, there is so much that has changed between then and now that really makes starting again so much different than starting over. The other example in my life that I keep thinking of for me was I did a complete change in my business. For the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, I was a dating and relationship coach for women, and I did that for almost 5 years. I put a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy into building that business. And then a couple years ago, I decided to transition into more business strategy and business relationships. And there were several reasons that I made that decision. It was kind of one of those things where like the universe gives you a little whisper and you're like, yeah, I'm not listening to that. And then it gives you like a little tap and you're like, yeah, I'm not listening to that. And every time I got that hit of like, you should be doing something different, I was like, yeah, but I put a lot of time and money and energy into this. So no, thank you. And I remember someone saying to me at that time, don't continue making the same mistake over and over again just because you spent a lot of time and money making it. And I was like, dang. And that's how it feels, right? When I was thinking about walking away from my dating coaching business and starting a new business, it felt very much like starting over. Like I deleted my whole email list. Facebook deleted my account for me, so I didn't have to do that. But I had a Facebook group with like 2,000 single women in it. I had a single women's book club that I did, and I had like 200 women in that. And all of this stuff that I had built over the years and was like, now we're wiping it all out and starting over from zero. And that felt like such a huge undertaking that I was like, no, I'm not doing that. But when I started thinking about it as starting again rather than starting over, it didn't feel as daunting. And the reason that it is starting again rather than starting over is because now I know what it takes to grow an email list, right? Like I know right off the bat, I need some freebie or lead magnet to offer. I know what it takes to make a lead magnet that people are actually willing to give you their email address for. I know what works and what doesn't work when it comes to a lead magnet because I've tried tons of lead magnets that didn't work before finding ones that did. I know how to set the lead magnet up. I know how to create a form and a landing page. I know how to set up an automated sequence of emails so that everything goes the way that it's supposed to without me having to do all of the work. And all of this is stuff that I didn't know when I started my first business. And so, yes, I was starting over in a sense, but I really was just starting again because I had so much more experience and knowledge than I had the first time. And I also had a very different network than I had the first time. So even if you are starting again with something totally new, a new business, a new direction, a new offering, you still have a network of people if you have intentionally created a network by networking like a human and not like a salesy weirdo. Then you still have that network, right? These people are still going to support you. They're still going to refer people to you. They're still going to do everything that they can to help you succeed. And that is likely more than you had on day one. So it's important in your mind to be able to differentiate when you are starting again versus when you are starting over, and to recognize that it's not a reset, it's a continuation, even if it is a different business, because you are in a different place now than you ever have been. And I like to think of it as like an entrepreneurial backpack. So you have all of these things in your backpack to help you. I don't know, this might be a weird metaphor. We're just going with it. You have all these things in your backpack to help you along the journey, and you've collected them as you went. Like, okay, I'm really going to age myself, but I think it was Zelda on Nintendo where you went through the game and you picked up like different tools. Oh, also Mario 3. Thank you. If you're over 40, you know what I'm talking about. Like, you picked up the harp and the wings and all the things that helped you along the way. When you were on level 1 of Mario 3, you didn't have any of those things. So you just had to like fucking figure it out. But by the time you got to level 8 or whatever the highest level was, I don't know, you had all of these things in your backpack. So it was easier for you to beat the level, even if it was a level that you'd never seen before. Oh, that was a really good metaphor. I wasn't really sure where that was going, but I feel like it worked out really well. So starting again in your business is very much like that. On day 1, you didn't have anything in your backpack. Maybe you had a couple things in your backpack. Maybe you had things in your backpack that you were like, these are going to be super helpful. And then once you got into being an entrepreneur, you're like, this was not helpful at all. And so now you have a lot of other things in your backpack, a lot of tools, a lot of strategies, a lot of people that you didn't have before that are going to help you make this pivot or this change or this starting again so much less painful, so much smoother, and so much easier. So one of the things that I recommend if you find yourself in a space where you feel like you're starting over, or this is actually probably a helpful thing for you to do even before you get to that space, like right now, is sit down and make a list of all of the skills, all of the connections, all of the lessons that you have learned since day 1 of starting your business, or even since the last time you made a pivot or made a big change in your business. Sit down and think about, like, what skills do I have now that I didn't have before? Who is in my network, or what roles do I have filled in my network that I didn't have filled before? What knowledge do I have now that I didn't have before? And when you look at that list, it's really going to help you shift your perspective, because you're going to be able to see how much further ahead you are now than you were the last time you started. When you started from the beginning, you were starting from 0 and trying to get to 100. Now, maybe you're starting at 50 or 60 or 70 and trying to get to 100. And so that is going to make starting again feel a lot less daunting as well. The last thing I want to suggest is that when you are starting again, when you are making a pivot, when you are doing something differently, or you're doing a total relaunch, a total reboot, scrapping everything and quote unquote starting over, or you're just making a little change, I also like to think of it as a mosaic where every piece has a place, or like when you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle, especially a really big one with like a bunch of little tiny pieces, because you can't always tell that it's actually making something. You can't always tell like what is the picture going to be when I'm finished, but you know everything fits somewhere, and at some point this is all going to make sense when it's put together. So whenever I have something that I perceive as a failure, or something, like in full transparency, when I launched the Powerful Women Rising community the first time, it was full of a lot of things that I thought everyone was going to want. And it turned out I was right about some things and I was not right about other things. And so I was like, okay, that did not go how I thought it was going to. Step back, move some things around, change some things, relaunch, right? And sometimes that feels like a failure. And that feels like, why did I go down that path? It was such a waste of time. It was such a waste of money. But when you think about everything as a puzzle or as a mosaic where everything makes sense eventually, you do always get to the point where you're like, oh, now I see why I had to do it that way. Now I see why I had to go down that path to learn that lesson in order to get to where I am now. Nobody would be where they are now without those pivots, without those times that they had to start again. Like, I don't know anyone in their entrepreneurial journey that was like, I made every right choice the first time. Everything went great. Everything was a success, and everything that I planned on day one turned out exactly like I knew it was going to. Like, that just doesn't happen. So keeping that mindset of we are starting again and all of this is going to make sense at some point. I trust that this happened to me for a reason, that I went down this path for a reason, that there was something I was supposed to learn here that is going to help me later in my business, can be a game changer for your mindset, for your attitude. And that really has an impact on your motivation and your inspiration and your willingness to keep going. So I just want to remind you that starting again is a sign of growth. It is not a sign of defeat. It is not a sign of failure. It doesn't mean that what you did was a waste of time, that it was stupid, that you should have known better, that you should have done something else. Your journey is going exactly the way that it's meant to go. And if you are pivoting, if you are starting again, if you are scrapping everything that you've done and starting over, you are never back at square one. You are never stepping in the same river twice, because you are not the same woman that you were the first time you stepped in the river. You are now standing on a mountain of experience and knowledge and support that you didn't have the first time. I would love to hear your stories about starting over or starting again. So if you follow me on Instagram, definitely reach out there. I'm at Powerful Women Rising. And again, don't forget to click in the show notes and join me on February 29th and so far 251 other amazing women for our virtual speed networking event. All right, friends, have a great rest of your week.